This is my fourth video on my attempts to construct a small OO gauge layout. See part 1 for my reasons for doing this and my lengthy series on my N-gauge railway modelling for more interesting stuff with trains actually running, etc. This part is devoted to some changes I decided to make at the last moment, or after it, to the basic track design and landscaping of my OO gauge layout. If you saw my last video in this series, you'll recall that by the end of that video I had the basic landscape forming, painting and texturing completed, and had the track back down and wired so that locos could actually run on all sections of the layout. So I looked all set to move on to adding buildings, trees, etc., and really getting the layout going. But at that point I got decisively indecisive. Like many basic ideas, this one came to me whilst lying in bed at night. There were a couple of things bugging me. I'd picked up kits for 2 station buildings, an old Airfix booking hall kit and a Metcalfe Settle and Carlisle small station building, but my original plan only called for 1 station on the layout at top right in this plan in the red rectangle. Also there was the issue of the Scaledale goods shed. This was a very nicely made resin building, but its use was somewhat limited by the fact that it didn't allow the track to pass right through it, unlike many other goods sheds, for example the Metcalfe goods sheds kits. The track entered through an opening at one end of the shed, but opposite that was a blank wall, so the shed could only be used by placing it on the end of a siding branch, and of course having only one opening it could only be placed on the end of the branch in one way. With my layout as originally designed, the Scaledale shed necessarily had to go on the end of a branch running towards the right of the layout. This meant that the more interesting side of the building, with the goods entry doors, etc., ended up facing the back of the layout, where it would hardly ever be seen, and the side facing the front of the layout, from which the shed would normally be viewed, featured just a blank wall. So I was pondering in bed if it might be possible to fix these issues. Clearly the only way would be to somehow shoehorn in a siding branch running towards the left of the layout, on the end of which the Scaledale shed could be located, so facing round the other way. Then the branch where the shed was originally intended to go could be used for a small terminal station. There weren't a lot of options as far as how to do this, given the limited size of the layout and the restrictions of the existing track design. I concluded that the best way to manage this looked to be by branching another siding off from the main branch of the existing siding in a reverse direction, as shown here in the red rectangle. This did mean that the only way to get to the goods shed would be to pull down into one of the original end sidings and then reverse into the cargo shed branch. But that didn't seem to me a major issue, as by its very nature you'd always want to reverse into the goods shed. As there'd be no point running a loco into it, you'd always want to be propelling wagons into it so that they could be loaded. Of course, a distinct problem with this idea was that there was currently a hill located where the goods shed would be intended to go, and that hill was glued firmly down to the board and already painted and landscaped. Nevertheless, after a bit of dithering, I decided that it was worth making the change, even if it did demand ripping up that hill. So my next step was to pay another visit to my local hobby shop, Paris Junction Hobbies, in Paris, Ontario, to see if I could pick up the extra materials needed for this revision. With a little compromise I was able to do so, and here's what I brought back from the hobby shop: a Bachmann Easy Track left turnout set, a set of 4 short straights to allow for adjusting the line in the shed to the correct length, 1 loose curve section from a bin to turn the new branch, some more Pico terminal connectors to make the power connection for the new branch, another reel of wire as I'd used up all the reel I bought previously, and another Atlas switching set. This last item was the compromise. I'd rather have just bought a second Atlas selector, the same as the first one that I used, but there wasn't another one of those in stock, so rather than trying to order one of those from somewhere else, I went with what was in stock, this slightly different style of switching set from Atlas, which it appeared would do the job fine, although it would obviously make the controls less neat and consistent looking. Here's the area where the new branch and shed were to go, as it was at the start of this exercise. The first thing I did was just to loosely try the new track pieces in place to verify their fit. As you may see, it looks as though the fit should be okay, though that hill will certainly need to go. For this initial fit, I've just put all 4 of the short straight sections on the end of the new branch, but actually the plan was to use the full length straight displaced from the original siding by the insertion of the new point. Then the short straights could be used just to adjust the length of the new branch to the most appropriate. To get the hill loose from the layout, I turned to my kitchen for tools. I decided the best tool for the job would be this thin, flexible fish slice. The hill was held down to the layout in 2 ways. The original foam form had been glued down to the baseboard foam by a bead of Gorilla construction glue all around the hill. Then the hill had been covered with plaster cloth, and the plaster cloth served to additionally fix the hill to the baseboard all round its edges. So I needed to break both of these connections, to pry up the plaster cloth around the edge of the hill, and then to slide under the hill and cut through the bead of glue fastening the hill down. I worked all around the hill doing this, getting the fish slice right underneath and gently working it round. And I was able to free the hill without extreme damage to the hill itself or to the baseboard. There was some damage where the plaster cloth had been broken off around the edges, and where the glue had been holding the hill down, the glue, not surprisingly, proved stronger than the foam itself, so removing the hill essentially resulted in a groove in the baseboard foam where the glue bead had been. This is what things looked like after first removing the hill. You can see quite clearly the groove all the way round where the glue bead was. And here's the hill itself removed from the layout and currently sitting on the wing of a plane, because that's basically what my house is like, with planes, golf clubs and trains, or bits thereof, pretty much everywhere you turn. The first stage of clean-up was simply to vacuum up all of the debris, which certainly made things look a bit better. Then I picked off as much as I could of the remaining plaster cloth from the hill off the board, and ran over everything with some sandpaper, and then vacuumed once more. Next I applied some spackle with a putty knife to fill in the holes in the board as much as possible. I experimentally put the hill back on the board. It seemed a shame to just throw away this finished hill, but if it's going to be reused it would have to go on something like this, and that may create issues in respect of my intentions with other scenic elements such as the church and churchyard. So for now I'm just going to let the hill rest there, but not to do anything about fixing it back in place. In fact, you can see here that I've already moved the hill a bit further round. And now I've laid the new track back in its place and put the goods shed about where it will go. It certainly looks a lot better like this than it did in its previous location. Of course, the new section will need wiring, and for that wires will need to pass through the baseboard. That green wire is for the point control and will need to go down through the board, and there will also need to be wires for a power connection to the new branch connected to the tracks and going down through the board. One problem I had was that it turned out that the new Bachmann turnout set didn't come with an extension cord for its control. This seemed to me a bit derelict of Bachmann, as the cords that come fitted to their turnouts are only a couple of feet long, so in almost all cases an extension cord would be needed to properly install and control the points. The Easy Track starter set I originally bought included 4 sets of points, and did include 4 extension cords, but this new turnout set came with no extension cord, though it did include a control switch for the turnout and a cord to connect that to the auxiliary AC power. I ended up getting around this problem by stealing the extension cord from the original turnout closest to my control center, which I could just about connect up without an extension, so then I was able to use that extension to connect this new set of points, which certainly absolutely needed an extension. Here's the view of the changes from the back corner of the board. I decided that the area where the hill had been would serve quite well as a yard area for the goods shed. But since obviously there would need to be road access to the shed, the road ending just short would need to be extended to join the new yard. I next went back to the bench to prepare the wiring, etc. I soldered up a pair of the Pico join connectors to suitable lengths of wire from the new reel, and covered the joins with heat shrink. Then I needed to make a place where those Pico join connectors could go onto the rails, which of course meant removing the fish plates that came fitted to the Bachmann track sections. From my previous experience, I knew how this had to be done. See my previous video on wiring. The fish plates had to be pried open with a knife and pliers and then pried off the rails by sliding a knife blade under the rail. Once the original fish plates were removed, I could make the power connection using the Pico joiners. I made this connection between two short sections intended to go on the end of the new branch. I also removed the fish plate and the plastic connecting pieces from the end of the last short section at the right here, to allow that to sit flush up against the back wall of the shed. I also needed to create an isolating join at the start of the new branch. This was done by removing the fitted Bachmann fish plates and replacing them with Atlas plastic isolating joiners. And back to the layout itself. I used a putty knife to scrape off the grass from the area between the end of the old road and the new yard as much as possible. Then I sanded everything again in preparation for painting. I painted over the entire area, including the road extension, using the grey latex paint I originally used for roads, yards and track beds. A bit more finishing may be needed, but this will serve as a basis for the area for now. There was a bit of an issue with the shed. The track entrance of the shed wasn't quite wide enough to allow the Bachmann Easy Track with its fitted track bed to fit. I could have raised parts of the yard area to allow the shed to sit higher and so fit over the top of the track, but instead, for now at least, I chose to take a bit out of the Bachmann plastic track bed to make it fit. I had originally thought that I could file down both sides a bit, but that wouldn't actually work, as one side of the track fits right up against the back wall of the shed, so that side could only be moved over by taking a piece off the track bed for its entire length. So instead of doing that, I just cut a nick into the track bed on one side to allow the shed wall to fit in. This involved cutting out a piece about 1/4 inch long and 1/8 of an inch wide. You can see the piece that I cut out on the bench beside the track. This looks reasonably neat, and hopefully it should allow the track and the shed to function properly. We'll see. If there are problems, we'll get something changed to fix them. Next, the wires needed to get into place. For the turnout, I managed to get away without making a new hole through the board. I ran the wire along under the track and then through the board using the hole already made for the wire of the turnout immediately next to the new one. I did of course need to make a hole through the board for the new power connection as seen here. This was just a simple single hole drilled right through with a long 1/4 inch bit. Here's the new Atlas switching set. It's unfortunate that I couldn't get one matching the first set I used. This set is just designed to provide connections to 3 feeds, each of which can be turned on and off, which is all I need really. And here it is in place and connected up. It works like this, but it does look a bit silly. The wire connected to the left switch of the new set goes to the non-common side of the new branch. The common side of the new branch is connected directly to the common side of the power controller. I did end up also using the second switch of this new set to make the power feed to the main line also switchable. I'm not sure how useful that will be, since normally you wouldn't park trains on the main line, but since I now had spare switches, I thought I might as well do it. So here's my rather untidy control center after the new additions. I am going to fix the power switches and point control switches down to some kind of board, although even then the wiring will likely remain pretty untidy. Here's the goods shed now actually in place on the board with functional track. When I tried it with the Webb coal tank loco, I was a bit concerned to find that the loco wouldn't fit in. The dome and the chimney of the loco wouldn't clear the shed door. But there would be really no reason to drive locos into the shed. The real question is, will wagons fit in? I tried an 8-plank wagon, and predictably that posed no problems. I don't currently have any 00 gauge box cars, which would really likely be the most probable things to load in the shed. The nearest I had was a brake van, which should be about the same height as a boxcar, and that fitted through the door fine. So, for now, this revision is looking basically complete, at least for an initial cut, And now I am back where I thought I was before, with the basic track and landscape down, ready to move on to buildings, trees, etc. So now let's see a little bit of running video with the operation of the new section. Okay, let's have a try at a little demonstration, if we can, with two trains working, and in particular I want to focus on the new line that we've got to the goods shed there. But first we've got a little passenger train here on the outer line with a couple of LMS coaches pulled by the Fowler 3F loco that came with the Midland Marble set, the Midland Marble set. So we'll just pull him round. Now I've actually made the main line switchable now, since I had extra switches, but anyway, now he's not on the main line, he's on the outer section there, so I'm going to switch that section off, so now, as you can see, he will not move. So now we're going to try and bring out the train from the goods shed, but we'll change a couple of points first. Basically, I'm trying to change from this side to this side of the passing loop at the end here, and we'll put this is now the mainline power, but we'll put the power on for the goods shed, and we want to go forwards because we're trying to come out of it, and his point has to be turned. If we tried to come out and his point wasn't turned, we'd derail. Hopefully we should be able to come out now and not derail. There we go. So now we take his point there. Okay, I need the point there. I've straightened the point that goes to the goods shed, and I've also set the point at the end of the sidings there to turn. So now if I go in the reverse direction, if I'm lucky, I should be able to reverse the train out there onto that siding. So now we set the point for the goods side, for the sidings back straight, and we can now take this little freight train round the main line, whilst the other train sits on the passing siding there. Now I just want to demonstrate here that I have, as I have said, I have now made the main line itself switchable. So if I turn that switch off, that switch is now driving the actual main line, so the actual main line gets no power if that switch is down. Not sure quite how useful it is having the main line switchable, but since I got extra switches that were doing nothing, having bought this second set of switches, I figured we might as well do it. So now we got trains on both sides of the passing siding. So now we'll turn off the power to the inside of the passing siding. We'll set the points at either end of the passing siding back, turn on the power to the outer side of the passing siding, and we should have our passenger train moving again. Now I think as far as it goes, that pretty much illustrates how the operations of this layout at this point are supposed to work. Of course, there will be stations eventually and other buildings which I haven't built yet, but I can't pull into a station at the moment because I don't have a station, so that will have to do for now.